All right, folks. Hello and welcome back to online English class. Hope you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to continue the process of preparing for our rhetorical analysis exam on May 20th, Wednesday at 2 p.m. All right, before we get back into that process, let's quickly run through the top of the week announcements so you have a clear understanding of what is coming before you. All right, so make sure that you are accomplishing your daily discussion grade assignment today, very much like the other 2 days. We are going to have a unique assignment at the end of the class that I'm going to give to you at the end of the video. Okay, so pay attention for that, stay posted on that, and make sure that your comment reflects that assignment. Okay, you also need to be preparing for the AP exam independently, right? Make sure you download the review materials from RenWeb and you're sharpening your knowledge of how to read rhetoric and how to write a reasonable analysis of rhetoric throughout the course of the next week. Okay. Also, right, you need to have engaged with these College Board resources that basically summarize what the exam is going to be like and how you're going to access it. Okay, obviously that is available to you in a summary form on a document that we've already taken a look at together. Okay, it basically summarizes the fact that the exam is going to be at 2 p.m. The exam is going to be on May 20th. That's a Wednesday. That you're going to need access to the internet in order to access the exam. That you should log in 30 minutes prior to that exam being held. And that it would seem that you need to type that your response in some kind of word processor and then copy and paste or attach that document and send it to the College Board. Okay, so you guys should be well aware of how to do all of those things, and you're adaptable, smart students, so that should be no problem for you. Okay, beyond that, you need to be working on your quarter 4 essay, which you can submit anytime from May 18th to May 22nd. Okay, if you're overwhelmed or you feel like you don't have time to prepare for your exam because of these two assignments happening simultaneously, then you can contact me, and we can discuss some ways that we can mitigate some of that anxiety. Okay, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and return to the review process. All right, so up to this point, we've been working through and sharpening our skills and deepening our understanding of how to read rhetoric effectively. Okay, we've been talking about what rhetoric is, what a rhetorical analysis is, and the fact that for an analyst to adequately analyze a piece of rhetoric and to explain how a speaker's goals are, or purpose is being accomplished in a document, that reader, that analyst, needs to enter into the rhetorical situation and consider the ways in which the speaker is attempting to craft a message that is appealing to his or her audience. All right, the first major appeal that we discussed in some detail is the appeal to the audience's emotions. Okay, we call that the pathos appeal. All right, you don't have to call it the pathos appeal in order to analyze the emotional engagement between the speaker and the audience. Okay, so remember that, and please avoid abstract kinds of statements like the speaker is using the pathos appeal. Okay, well, that is to effectively say almost nothing, next to nothing, right? You need to be more specific than that, as always. All right, today we're going to talk about the logos appeal and also briefly the ethos appeal. Okay, so the logos appeal, to summarize, is the speaker's attempt to persuade the audience by deploying a kind of line of reasoning that leads to the rational conclusion that should be in alignment with their purpose or their goal. All right, so it's an argument by reason. It's an invitation to think a certain way or to use logic. All right, now the logos appeal is an informal application of logic as it builds on assumed ideas or premises that the audience already holds to be true. Okay, some devices associated with the logos appeal are obviously concession and refutation. Oftentimes, a speaker can concede a kind of premise or belief or concern to their audience and then deconstruct that concern in a logical way, using evidence or some kind of argumentation in order to accomplish their goal more effectively. Okay, they can structure their logic both deductively or inductively. All right, as we've studied at length, and you ought to know that almost all arguments. Or really all arguments use a combination of both of those things. Okay, no line of inductive reasoning is purely inductive. Okay, it always starts with some kind of assumed understanding of the meaning of words, or some kind of assumed knowledge. All right, so. Right, to deepen our understanding of logic, right, we start with an understanding of claims. Okay, what a claim is? It's a contentious kind of statement that requires some kind of evidence. Okay, and we support claims, whether those are claims of fact or claims of value or claims of policy. We support claims with evidence. Okay, and evidence should be persuasive in accordance to the rhetorical situation, right? Depending on who that claim is directed to, the evidence that is offered needs to appeal to that specific audience's sense of reason or sense of rationality, all right? And there's a variety of different forms of evidence that you can take note of in a document. You can take note of the use of firsthand experiences or personal anecdotal forms of evidence, all right, that rely on your firsthand or the speaker's firsthand experiences or someone that the speaker knows personally, all right. Albright does that extensively throughout the course of her speech. You could also appeal to secondhand sources, expert information, historical evidence. You could appeal to literary sources or traditional wisdom or quantitative evidence. Okay, so while Albright doesn't directly use these in the excerpt that we've been studying, right, she certainly does build a kind of logical line of reasoning that supports her goal. Okay, so to kind of summarize and give you a sense of how logos works in general, all right, let's consider Adolf Hitler and his persuasion of the German people that in the late 20s and early 30s that supporting the Nazi Party's final solution to the Jewish menace was a reasonable action. Right? So how did Hitler achieve this huge kind of rhetorical goal? Right? That we ought to kill dispose of millions of people living in our borders. Well, he begins, as all good rhetoric does, with the acknowledgement of a simple premise. All right, that the German people, a group unified by their Aryan blood. Okay, that's what sort of Hitler postured what it meant to be German. Okay, so very unlike what it means to be American, which is not about blood necessarily. Hitler, as a fascist, right, argued that the German people were, in their purest sense, a group unified by their blood. All right, and this group of people were exceptional. They're a master race. Okay, and so although this is a flawed premise, all right, this was a premise that was supported with Nazi science. All right, in other words, inductive evidence that supported and confirmed German sense that this was true. All right, and this information was disseminated to the German public through a variety of means, primarily through propaganda. Okay, that attempted to persuade the German people. All right, both in Hitler's rhetoric and also indirectly in the sort of the machinations of his party, that the German people, all right, were right in thinking that they were a master race. Okay, so then, right, you have to consider the fact, well, right now, we, the master race, are definitely suffering, right? We've lost World War I. We are in a state of complete and utter economic devastation after the global depression. So we, as the master race, there's got to be some kind of thing that is stopping us from achieving our destiny, some kind of evil that we need to overcome. All right, well, the next premise that Hitler laid out for the German people is that that evil was embodied by, Das Juden, the Jew. All right, and then the Nazi Party offers this inductive, seemingly scientific evidence that supports the premise that Jews were evil. All right, that they were evil by nature, evil incarnate. All right, everything that they did had sort of destruction at the core of their motives. Okay, so with those two premises in place, supported inductively with this seemingly pseudoscientific evidence, all right, that is obviously, in hindsight, not true, but with those two premises in place and supported inductively, the reasonable action becomes for the German people to support and to consent to and even eventually to participate in the final solution. Okay, this is a great example of a rhetor, a master rhetorician, Hitler himself, deploying the logos appeal in order to persuade a massive group of people to behave in the way that he wanted them to behave, all right, to engage in this final solution, and ultimately, right, to obey his understanding of what the German people should do. Okay, so the logos appeal in Albright's speech that we have been taking a look at, although much less evil, all right, functions in a very similar way. Okay, so Albright, to accomplish her goal, which, as we have already stated, is to persuade her audience of young college graduates to reject a life of narrow, selfish complacency and to actively engage in the process of pursuing justice throughout the world. Okay, in order to accomplish this goal, Albright not only engages with the audience's emotions, as we have already discussed in previous review. She does do that, but simultaneously, and as she is doing that, she is building a cogent line of reasoning that is based on an acknowledgement of her audience's most basic assumption that human life, regardless of race, nationality, or gender, is worth defending at any cost. Okay, so in other words, if that premise is not held true by both speaker and audience, then the whole argument falls apart. Okay, very similar to Winthrop's argument with respect to his Puritan audience. If the Puritans reject Orthodox Christians, a Christian understanding of the Bible and all of the theological premises that come along with affirming that the Bible is God's word, then his argument to live a certain way in the New World falls apart. Okay, so in the same way, Albright's logic is based on this tacit acknowledgement of this basic premise. Okay, all right, and that is implied in the rhetorical situation. We, as the reader, can see that premise brimming or bubbling over the logic of the text. Okay, so how does she develop her line of reasoning? Okay, well, first, she builds on this existing commonplace, is what we call it. Okay, that's what Heinrich calls it, and thank you for arguing. It's what we've referred to it as. Another word we've used for it is a premise. Okay, she builds on this premise by providing a string of examples of the unjust circumstances that exist around the world. Okay, so the fact that the nuclear arsenals still threaten the well-being of people all around the world. Okay, that is not a good thing. It's not good for governments to have access to world-ending kinds of weaponry, especially if those governments are run by flawed individuals who can exert tyrannical wills, like, for instance, Hitler. That those kinds of people exist, so it is reasonable to try and dismantle that. Right? It's reasonable to try and dismantle the child maiming scourge of landmines. All right, it's reasonable to fight against the forces of ethnic cleansing and other kinds of fascist ideologies that attempt to assert that certain races have a right to life while others do not. Okay, that a world economy that entraps certain individuals into poverty and discriminates against certain individuals ought to be dismantled. Okay, so all of these examples of unjust circumstances listed in this portion of the essay, all right, lead to this logical conclusion that if the college graduates are to maintain the integrity of their most basic belief that is implicit, all right, if you go to this college and you're graduating from this college, you went to Mount Holyoke and you are one of these uncommon women, then you obviously are not like a fascist, all right? You believe, as a good American ought to, that individuals all across the world, because by the mere fact that they are human beings, have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so if the college graduates are going to maintain the integrity of that belief, all right, which they want to do, I would assume. Okay, at least the majority of them. Some of them are probably asleep or completely indifferent, or so privileged that they don't even care about this stuff. Okay, but for those that are exercising their reason, all right, you're driven to the rational conclusion. The audience is driven to the rational conclusion that they cannot live narrowly or selfishly. All right, that you cannot believe, all right, that this is true. Okay, and also be at peace with these realities. All right, something has got to give, and it's got to be you. You can't just narrowly and selfishly accept it, right? So that is a very reasonable kind of conclusion that is built into her line of reasoning. Now, does that exist apart from her pathos appeal? No. As a matter of fact, her line of reasoning is enhanced by her pathos appeal, right? The emphasis on the child maiming scourge of landmine and the injustices of poverty and discrimination, all of these kinds of appeals to the emotional senses of the audience are ultimately serving and helping support, just as the logic of the passage is serving and helping support the larger goal to act, to be, to behave the way that Albright is trying to persuade her audience to act, to behave, and to believe. Okay, so second, she continues to support this call, all right, in the next sort of chunk of the passage. All right, and if I'm writing this essay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to chunk my analysis according to the chronology of the passage. And I'm going to be analyzing the logic, sort of the development of the line of reasoning in the beginning, in the middle, and then in the end. Okay, and I might even develop or expand that analysis by discussing the ways in which Albright is using the pathos and ethos appeal to develop and defend and substantiate this line of reasoning. Okay, so in the second major portion, she supports her call to action by providing examples of these uncommon women. All right, these uncommon women who the women of Mount Holyoke, right, are compared to. You, like them, are uncommon women, and they are pursuing justice around the world. All right, the injustice exists; it's there, but it can be redeemed by faithful and courageous effort, right? Note, okay, all of these examples of these uncommon women from various corners of the world fighting against injustice, all right? And they're placed in parallel structure, building this sort of mountain of evidence that supports the notion that I can change it, okay? So it follows logically that because it exists and because you can act in a way that is beneficial and because you believe this to be true on the most basic level, then therefore you ought to, right? It follows logically that you ought to. Here, Albright, by developing her line of reasoning, by structuring the language the way that she structured it, is appealing to her audience's sort of inherent rational sense that if I believe this to be true, all right, and it is true that there is injustice, and it's also true that there are uncommon women just like me all over the world who are fighting effectively against those forces of injustice, it follows that I should do it too, that I cannot embrace a life of narrow, selfish complacency, but I must rather, like Albright says in the very beginning, act with courage and faith. Okay? And finally, the last movement of the argument that we haven't discussed in great detail, but is extremely significant here, is Albright transitions into a kind of concession that the audience might be feeling like this is going to be hard or this is going to cost them something, right? And she tells them as much, right? It is certain that if you aim high enough, that you will find your strongest beliefs ridiculed and challenged. Principles that you cherish may be derisively dismissed by those claiming to be more practical or realistic than you. But no matter how weary you may become in persuading others to see the value in what you value, have courage and persevere. All right. So inevitably, she says again, all right, conceding these kinds of fears that our audience would have. All right. This is going to be tough. This is going to be hard. This is probably going to cost something for me. Right. Albright deconstructs that concern, okay, by essentially saying, right, those concerns are ultimately what? Ultimately unimportant. If you believe this, it shouldn't matter. All right, if you get tired of arguing with those who have made peace with injustice, it shouldn't matter. All right, how much what the price that you have to pay in order to pursue this justice. If you believe this premise to be true, it follows that you must what? Have courage and persevere. Okay, you must persevere in courage and faith. You don't have the option logically, according to your own value system and the premise that you believe to be true. You don't have the option to cave to this kind of pressure. All right. So by the end of the argument, right, not only has Albright engaged with the audience's emotional senses, all right, empowering them, encouraging them, all right, offering them a sense of solidarity that they would want to feel as they engage in this pursuit. But she's also developed a line of reasoning that simply, all right, says that if you believe this to be true, all right, it entails that you must do some stuff. You can't live narrowly. There is injustice in the world. All right. She lists her firsthand experiences. She's Secretary of State, so she's been around the world, right? She's seen a few things. She lists her firsthand experiences of that injustice. And also, she lists her firsthand experiences of women like them fighting effectively against it. It therefore follows that despite all of their concerns about the negative blowback that comes with living an idealistic life in pursuit of the good, of being woke, right, Dominic? Okay, that despite all the blowback that comes from those that are at peace with injustice and simply affirm that it's the way of the world, why don't you be more practical and realistic? That one does not have the option, if they assert that this is true, to be at peace with that. Okay, so her line of reasoning supports her goal, and her line of reasoning also includes these emotional appeals that also support her goal. You see how it's all unified in the support of this central goal. All right, so if we put these two things together, right, we have a really rocking essay, okay, that has taken account of the way that Albright has both engaged with the audience's emotions and also with their rational minds, okay. And there's one other area that we could consider. Okay, so our fourth review point, and certainly not last because it's least. Okay, and it's certainly not something that isn't super evident in this text. I just chose to emphasize pathos and logos first and foremost. Okay, but the ethos appeal is all about, right, cultivating a trusting relationship between speaker and audience. Okay, so if we go back to the basic information describing that ethos appeal from our lectures, right, we remembered that ethos at its core is about persuading the audience that you are a person of character. Okay, that you have adopted your speech to the occasion itself. Albright does that, right? Her language she's not speaking to a field hockey team in the huddle as their captain. She's speaking as the Secretary of State at a commencement address, and her language and tone reflect a decorous understanding of that situation. You could write about that, okay? She is virtuous according to the values of her audience, all right? If this is her audience's most basic value, Albright postures herself without bragging or gloating, but she postures herself as one of these uncommon women who is working for justice all across the world, posturing herself or characterizing herself as a person who ought to be listened to. Okay, she's a successful individual. She is a powerful woman. She is one of these uncommon women who is working in her corner of the globe to make the world more just. All right. So, what I would like for you to do now is your assignment is to consider how Albright develops that appeal. All right, by appearing wise, that she has knowledge in the area, that she's disinterested. Okay, that she's got the best interests of her audience at heart, that she cares about them. Okay, she's not just up there to try and I don't know, like sell her her perfume brand or something like that. That she's virtuous and she's decorous. These aspects of the ethos appeal, I'd like for you to investigate and try and articulate the nature of Albright's ethos appeal, all right, and then provide some textual examples, at least two textual examples of how she develops that ethos appeal in her argument. Okay, that is your comment assignment for the day. Okay, so spend about 10 or 15 minutes working on that, and then you can go about the process of preparing for your exam and getting all of your other work done for your other classes um, at your own pace and according to your own volition. All right, that is all we have for today. Right, today we talked about how to read logos or lines of reasoning, right? And we looked at a great example of a line of reasoning that appeals to its audience's most basic value system and then draws logical conclusions according to those value systems, all right? Combining deduction and induction. Okay, so Albright, great passage and a great sort of exploration of the pathos appeal at work, all right, specifically in a rhetorical situation, the logos appeal at work, specifically in a rhetorical situation, and the ethos appeal at work, specifically in a rhetorical situation, all right? Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about style. All right, we're going to look at some more close examples of how Albright is making choices in the way that she frames her sentences and chooses words to develop these kinds of impressions. All right, another way that you can add sophistication to your analysis. All right, so we'll reconvene tomorrow. Hope you guys have a great day.